All right, good morning, East Texas. We are joined here on the show now by our Lane, Lucky. Lane, good morning.
Good morning to you. Guten Morgen.
Guten Morgen. I was going to say yes, sir, because you are not here in East Texas. You are elsewhere. You're abroad this morning.
That's right. For the next several days, for about the next week, we'll be here in Berlin, Germany, covering the big federal parliamentary election that's happening on Sunday. Of course, 4 years ago, we started this in-depth look at what happens in Germany and how it affects us here in East Texas. Of course, we covered the last parliamentary election and some big changes. And of course, that set the tone for really the majority of Donald Trump's presidency and how things played out between the ruling parties, the coalition of parties here in Germany, and of course, the Trump White House. And now, 4 years later, there's a new American president, and there's soon to be a new German chancellor. Angela Merkel, who's often called the most powerful woman in the world, she is set to leave office after 16 years. She has spanned so many U.S. administrations. And so a lot of people are looking at this as a possible reset in relations between the U.S. and Germany. Of course, a new president in January with Joe Biden, and then soon to be a German parliament will elect its new chancellor sometime later this year. But it all begins this Sunday with the election of a new parliament, the Bundestag, which is the lower house of parliament. It's similar to our U.S. House of Representatives, to make a comparison. They will then, depending on which party gets a certain percentage of votes, have to form a coalition of several parties, sometime on very opposite ends, to get legislation done. And then they, as a body, will elect a new chancellor. So the parties have a little more power here in the German parliament, but the tone is set by the head of government, which is the chancellor.
Now, as far as the election, of course, we're going to have more coverage of that throughout the week ahead. One of the things I saw mentioned that really caught my attention was that the lower house, the Bundestag, is going to have up to 900 members, which sounds really unwieldy at some point.
Right. We think of 435 as being a lot for the U.S. House of Representatives. And the German Bundestag typically hovers in the range of 5 to as many as 700. It all changes from election to election based on constituencies, and so it could swell to as big as 900 or more representatives in the Bundestag. And so that's going to make ruling a government, that's going to make coalition building and working together probably a lot more complicated. And in some ways, I've heard the term bloated being used to describe this. So it's a wait and see kind of situation. Currently, Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats, the conservatives here, they have held the majority, or I shouldn't say a majority. They have often been the senior member in coalitions in recent years. But it's looking like any number of coalitions could be formed right now. There are so many mainstream political parties here in Germany. It's very different from just the red and blue, the Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. You have the CDU, which is the Christian Democrat Union, and the CSU, which is its sister party in Bavaria. They often take the greatest number of seats in the Bundestag. And then you have the Social Democrats, the SPD. They have had several chancellors since the democratic Germany was formed. And then you have the Free Democrats, the left, AfD, the ultra right-wing Alternative for Deutschland. They're often seen as anti-immigrant and have had some controversial views and candidates. And they made their way into parliament for one of the first times in the history. And of course, the Greens. The Greens have been polling really well in recent months here in Germany. And so many of these parties, because it's not expected, one party will receive an actual majority 50% of the vote or more, they will have to form a coalition in order to then form a government and work together. So there's any number of outcomes here.
Definitely, for sure, a lot to watch out for. But of course, before you could cover it, you had to get there, right? And getting there is a whole story on its own because we got pandemic travel, we've got security issues, we've got stuff and our own stateside, just our own travel restrictions. So how's that been this morning?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to share that with all of you. If anyone was watching during GMET just about an hour ago, we talked a bit about some changes at DFW. It's, of course, not only the state's biggest airport, but one of the biggest airports and busiest airports in the world. And I know a lot of folks have not traveled since the start of the pandemic. And people are kind of dipping their toe in the water, and we're seeing the numbers support that. The Delta variant really has, though, kind of caused a slump in ticket sales as of late, but the airlines say they're expecting things to pick back up when it comes to the holidays. Now, they at DFW have used this as a time to work on some major projects that might have been difficult otherwise, but we'll start with safety protocols. They're actually using something called UVC, ultraviolet C light, inside the existing air handlers throughout the airport. So this special light actually destroys viruses in the air particles moving through the air handlers. And so they spent millions of dollars on upgrading all of the air handlers throughout the airport to try and make the air a little better and safer to breathe while you're in the airport. Of course, right now you still have to wear a mask. It's federal law. It's a federal requirement, not only on the airport property, but on flights. So that's one change people may be familiar with. But they've also gone to some touchless bathrooms. All of the bathrooms now have the motion-activated soap and water dispensers, things like that. What's also really cool is there are now video panels outside nearly every restroom in the airport that tell you the number of open stalls. Once you get inside the restroom, there are lights on the ceiling, red and green, that tell you whether a stall is available. So it's the little things, I guess. There have been several other projects that they've been working on to try and make the airport properties as safe as possible for people. But the other big thing is construction, and there's a lot of it going on right now. The D terminal at DFW is the international terminal. They just opened a south extension with several new gates, and it really takes on a new look. Very modern, airy, open. The big thing that I noticed is that you can now order food and drinks in your seat by the gate. There's a QR code on each individual seat, and you scan it, you order what you want, and they bring it to you so that you can stay in your seat. So maybe it's a little safer, but I think it's a lot more convenient as well. One of the other big
Absolutely.
projects is the C terminal. American Airlines has a lot of flights through here. They're actually working on what's considered the only project of its type at an airport in the world, a modular construction of a new part of the terminal. Apparently, it was a lot more efficient and economical to build these modular segments of the terminal elsewhere on airport property and then truck it across the runway and the tarmac and slide it into place and construct it that way. And so that's an ambitious project. I will say a lot of people had heard about Terminal F, and that was going to be a sixth terminal on the ring of terminals at DFW. Because of the pandemic, that's on hold for now, but we'll see if that project gets revisited in the near future. And many airlines are coming back as well. Air travel ground to a halt during the pandemic, we know that, and many airlines suspended their routes and reduced their capacity. But a lot of them are coming back at this point. In fact, some are not only coming back, but there are new routes. On Friday, Turkish Airlines actually starts a multiple day a week route direct from Dallas to Istanbul. And so that's opening up an entire new part of the world there in the Mediterranean for travelers. Qatar Airways recently came back, and there's a whole list of them. We actually have a story on KLTV and KTRE.com. You'll just go to the community tab, then click the In Focus page. And there you'll find this story that really details all of the airlines that are coming back. If you look at air travel in July, this past month or 2 months ago was the latest numbers they had available. The number of travelers through DFW is up 112% over the same time last year. And we know that was kind of the height of the pandemic as far as air travel was being concerned. So it is coming back. And with the influx of passengers expected, especially this fall and winter, they've also rolled out some new amenities in the airport as well. The airline lounges, most of them have reopened. The American Express Centurion Lounge, it has reopened, and Capital One is planning to open its own lounge in Terminal D sometime this fall. And I'll end with this, Jeremy, something that will cause everyone's ears to perk up. DFW Airport is about to get its second Whataburger location. Of course, the first location opened within the last couple of years in the satellite terminal E, the one that's kind of like out in the middle of the runway, has the small regional flights. If you're from East Texas and you're familiar with flying into Tyler or Longview, you know that the flights back home to Tyler and Longview typically leave from that E terminal, and there is a Whataburger there, and the only one in the airport until later this year. There will be either later this year or early 2022, there will be a second Whataburger, and that has set the internet on fire. Of course, people who don't have one on every corner like us tend to freak out a little bit about that. So that is our look at travel right now. Americans can travel abroad. It depends on each country and what their regulations are. Throughout the European Union, they've opened their borders again to Americans. Later in the week, one thing that we'll talk about is exactly what that process looks like. Do you have to be tested? Do you have to be vaccinated? Things like that. Each country has its own formula for making that happen. But a lot of Europeans here, folks I talked to just yesterday here in Berlin, are really wanting to get back to the U.S., and U.S. regulations have not changed, even though European regulations have. So the U.S. is saying no to Europeans visiting, at least still for the time being.
So as just a quick question on that front, as far as Americans visiting these other countries in the EU, et cetera, is it on the traveler to know what those rules are before they book their flight, or will they get the information as they go about the booking process?
Sure. And again, later in the week, we'll talk more about this in detail, but that's a great question. It's a little of both. It is ultimately on the traveler to understand the rules and regulations for their destination. But a lot of the airlines, I know American, Delta, and United have all created different travel apps that help you understand the entry and return requirements for not only the U.S., but for other countries. So for example, here to enter Germany, you either had to be vaccinated or you had to have a COVID test and then quarantine for a certain amount of time in order to enter the country. For Americans coming back from abroad, you have to be tested in order to get back in the country. So it's a lot of information, and it's actually quite complicated. So you have to do a good bit of research if you are planning to travel abroad.
Okay, and of course we're going to have more throughout the week on that as well.
Absolutely. Every day on GMET we'll be live in the 6 to 6:30 half hour, and then I hope to be able to talk to you here on East Texas Now each day coming up through the rest of the week.
Okay, well, Lane, we're glad you made it there safely. Have a great time in Germany, and we'll talk to you. We'll talk to you soon. We'll talk throughout the week.
Thanks, my friend. We'll see you soon.
Have a good time.